son slid a folder across my kitchen table and said, "Dad, we've been doing the math. You owe us $63,000 in back rent, and if you don't pay, we're going to have to ask you to leave." His wife sat beside him with her arms crossed, not looking at me. I looked at my son, who I'd taught to ride a bike in the driveway of the house I'd owned for 31 years, and he held my gaze without flinching. I stood up, took my coffee mug, and walked out the back door without saying a single word. 6 hours later, at 2 a.m, my phone showed 22 missed calls. Something had gone very, very wrong for them. I should explain how I ended up in that kitchen in the first place. My name is Walter. No, I'll start over. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened to me. I'm 64 years old. I spent 38 years working for a shipping logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio. Started as a dispatcher, retired as regional operations director. My wife, Audrey, passed from ovarian cancer 4 years ago. We had 2 children, my daughter, who lives in Portland and calls me every Sunday without fail, and my son, who lives in Tempe, Arizona, with his wife and my 7-year-old grandson. After Audrey passed, I held it together for about 18 months. Then the house started feeling less like a home and more like a museum. Every room had something of hers in it. The garden she'd planted along the back fence. The handwriting on the recipe cards still tucked inside the cabinet above the stove. I'd stand in the kitchen on Saturday mornings making coffee, and the silence would press against me like something physical. My son called in February of last year, voice warm and easy, the way it gets when he's about to ask for something. "Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a while? Sell the Columbus house, take a break. We've got the guest room. Beckett would love having his grandpa around." Beckett is my grandson, 7 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs and building things out of cardboard boxes. I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I said yes. I sold the house in April. 31 years of my life. Got in a closing that took 45 minutes. I netted $212,000 after the mortgage and fees. I put $160,000 into a money market account, paid off my car, and drove to Tempe in early May with 2 suitcases, a box of Audrey's photo albums, and the ceramic cartonor she kept on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, because she said it brought good luck. The first month was fine, genuinely fine. I helped with Beckett's school pick-up 3 days a week. I fixed a screen door my son had been meaning to fix for 2 years. I made dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays because my daughter-in-law worked late those nights, and I found I liked having a reason to cook again. I gave my son $25,000 in cash in June when he mentioned he was behind on a business loan connected to the landscaping company he'd been trying to build. I didn't ask for it back. I just handed it to him because he was my son, and he needed it, and I had it. The second month, I started to notice things. The way my daughter-in-law would go quiet when I entered a room. Not hostile exactly, more like calculating. The way my son would sometimes look at me across the dinner table with something behind his eyes that I couldn't quite name. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd been living alone for 4 years. I'd forgotten how to read people. Then the folder landed on my kitchen table. I sat in my car in their driveway for 11 minutes after I walked out. The Arizona night was warm and dry, and the streetlights put orange halos on the pavement. I kept thinking about the number, $63,000. For 10 weeks, I hadn't even been there 10 weeks. I opened the folder on the passenger seat. My hands weren't shaking. They were perfectly still, which felt strange. Inside was a single printed page, formatted like an invoice. Header at the top, Household Expense Reimbursement Statement. My name listed as the debtor. Below it, a table. Room and board, 10 weeks at $1,500 per week. 15,000. Utility supplement, 4,200. Medical accommodation, that one almost made me laugh out loud. I take a blood pressure medication and a low-dose aspirin every morning. Medical accommodation, 6,800. Grocery differential, personal care and household labor. Miscellaneous, the rest, padded out to reach $63,000 exactly. I turned the page over. On the back was a payment schedule. First installment, $8,000. Due within 7 days, Failure to pay would initiate eviction proceedings under Arizona landlord-tenant statute. I read that part twice. Eviction proceedings. For my own son's guest room, in a house I'd helped him furnish, while caring for my own grandson 3 afternoons a week. Then I noticed something at the bottom of the page. Small grey text, the kind you don't see unless you're looking. Document created, March 14. I checked the date on my phone. July 22nd. I'd arrived in Tempe in early May. March 14 was 8 weeks before I even agreed to come. I sat very still in the car. I thought about a specific Saturday in March. My son had called me, warm and easy. "Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a while?" He'd already made the invoice. I took a photo of the page with my phone, the document creation date, the charges, the payment schedule, all of it. Then I put the folder on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove. I ended up at a Denny's off the I-10 at 11:30 at night. The waitress was maybe 50, silver streaks ponytail, moved like someone who'd been on her feet since noon and didn't mind. She brought me coffee without asking. I sat in a corner booth for an hour and a half, turning my phone over and over on the table. I kept coming back to the same fact. That document was created 8 weeks before I arrived. Before the kitchen, before Beckett's school pickups, before the screen door. Before I handed him $25,000 in cash. He hadn't reacted to my moving in. He planned for it. At 12:40 in the morning, I drove back to the house. I needed my laptop, my medications, and Audrey's photo albums. That was all. I used my key, went in through the side door. The house was dark. I moved quickly down the hallway to the guest room and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Not just my suitcases gone. The bed frame, the nightstand, the lamp I'd bought at Target in week 2 because the overhead light was too harsh. All of it. The closet door hung open and the shelves were bare. They hadn't just moved my things. They'd staged the room like I'd never been there. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I walked to the living room. My son was on the couch with his laptop. My daughter-in-law stood by the kitchen counter. Beckett was asleep, which was the only mercy. "Where's my stuff?" I said. My son didn't look up from the screen. "We moved it to the garage. You can collect it when you've made arrangements. You moved it tonight. We assumed you weren't coming back." His voice was flat, professional almost. Like he'd rehearsed this part too. I looked at my daughter-in-law. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second and then looked away. I went to the garage and loaded Audrey's photo albums into the trunk of my car. I found the ceramic cardinal wrapped in a dish towel at the bottom of a cardboard box, and I put that on the passenger seat where I could see it. I left most of my clothes. They weren't worth the time. Before I left, I stood in the hallway for a moment. On the wall near the front door, there was a framed photo from my son's wedding. Audrey and me, my son, my daughter-in-law, Beckett, as a baby. Audrey was laughing at something off camera. It was one of my favorite photos of her from the last few years of her life. My son had left that one up. I didn't know whether that was deliberate or whether he'd just forgotten. Either way, it was the last thing I saw before I left. I drove to a Marriott's off the highway and checked in for 3 nights. I sat on the edge of the bed and called my daughter. She answered on the second ring. It was almost 1 in the morning. "Dad, what's wrong?" I told her everything. She didn't say a word until I finished. Then she said, very quietly, "Give me 24 hours." My daughter is 41 years old. She works in healthcare administration, which means she spends her days untangling complicated systems that other people have broken. She is precise, and she is patient, and she does not panic. She called me back the next morning at 7:15. "I reached out to a friend of mine," she said. "His name is Harmon Reed. He's an elder law attorney based in Phoenix. He wants to meet with you today at 2 o'clock if you can make it." "Dad, what your son did? That document creation date alone, that's potentially financial elder abuse. Arizona Statute ARS 46456. It's a serious charge." I wrote down the name and the address, and I drank the bad hotel coffee, and I thought about how, 40 years ago, I used to drive my son to Little League practice on Saturday mornings. He sat in the back seat with his cleats already on his feet, ready before anyone else. Harmon Reed's office was in a low building near Scottsdale Road, desert landscaping out front, the kind of tasteful modest that says, competent without trying. He was 55 or so, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, firm handshake. He looked at the photo on my phone, the invoice, the document creation date, for about 30 seconds without speaking. "Tell me everything," he said. "Don't leave anything out." I talked for 40 minutes. When I finished, he set down his legal pad and said, "The document creation date is your strongest piece of evidence. It establishes premeditation, combined with the fact that you gave him $25,000 in June freely, and he never disclosed that he'd already prepared this demand. That's coercive financial manipulation. In Arizona, it carries real teeth. I don't want to send my son to prison," I said. "I understand that." He leaned back. "Here's what I'd recommend. We build the case first, quietly, and then you approach him with the option to resolve this without involving the authorities. That's leverage, not punishment. If he's reasonable, this ends quietly. If he's not, you're protected." We spent the next hour building an evidence checklist. Bank records going back 3 years, every transfer, every gift. Text messages showing requests for money. The original document I'd photographed. Harmon drafted a letter to my son's LLC, requesting proof that the $25,000 I'd given in June was properly accounted for, which would force the paper trail into the open. He also noted something I hadn't thought about. The document had been created under a file name recoverable from metadata. If my son had drafted this on a shared family computer I'd ever used, we could potentially obtain it through discovery. "One more thing," Harmon said, pulling out a separate sheet. "I'd recommend you get a cognitive assessment on record. Simple precaution. If your son ever claims you were confused or impaired when you made financial decisions, we want documentation that contradicts that." I drove back to the hotel with the checklist on the passenger seat next to Audrey's ceramic cardinal. The next 5 days had a rhythm to them. I woke early. I made bad hotel coffee. I worked. I went through 3 years of bank records and built a spreadsheet. The first gift to my son dated to 2019, $800 for a truck repair. After that, the requests came in irregular intervals. 1,000 here, 1,500 there, a few times, lump sums. The landscaping equipment he said he needed. The insurance gap when his policy lapsed for 60 days. The security deposit on the Tempe house when they moved in 4 years ago, which I'd paid entirely. I added it all up, $61,400 over 4 years. Not counting the $25,000 in June, $86,400. I sat in the hotel room looking at that number for a long time. My daughter flew in from Portland on day 3. She brought her laptop, 2 days of clothes, and a bag of groceries, because she said hotel food was depressing. We sat at the small desk in my room, and she helped me organize the text messages. She was systematic about it, in a way I couldn't have been alone. She built a folder, screenshotted everything in chronological order, labeled each file by date and dollar amount. 41 requests for money over 4 years. She never said anything while we worked. She just sat beside me and kept going. On day 4, I drove to the University of Arizona Medical Center and asked to see a neurologist for a cognitive assessment. The doctor, a quiet man in his early 50s, administered 2 tests. I scored 29 out of 30 on the first and 30 out of 30 on the second. He wrote me a letter on official letterhead confirming that I demonstrated full cognitive and decision-making capacity with no evidence of impairment. I folded that letter carefully and added it to the folder. On day 5, I called Harmon and told him I was ready. He had drafted a financial acknowledgement form. 1 page, clean language. It stated that my son had received $86,400 from me over 4 years, that this constituted the entirety of the financial support I had provided, and that he waived any claim of debt against me, including the $63,000 demand. If he signed, we were done. If he didn't, Harmon would file an elder abuse complaint with the Arizona Department of Economic Security and refer the matter to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. We set the meeting for Sunday evening. I asked my daughter to be there. I also called Ray, My brother-in-law, Audrey's younger brother, who lives in Chandler. He was 60, retired, and had known my son since my son was in diapers. He agreed without hesitating. "You sure about this?" he said on the phone. "I'm sure," I said. "Audrey wouldn't have wanted this. Audrey would have told him no 20 years earlier than I did," I said. Ray laughed once, short and surprised. "Yeah," he said. "You're right about that." The meeting was at a community room at the public library, neutral territory, Harmon's suggestion. My son arrived with his wife. They were 12 minutes late. My daughter and Ray were already seated. Harmon sat at the head of the table with the folder in front of him. My son looked at the people in the room and his expression flickered, just for a second, before he composed it back into something steady. "What is this?" he said. "Sit down," I said. "Please." They sat. Harmon opened the folder. He walked through it calmly and methodically. The invoice, the document creation date of March 14th, the gap of 8 weeks before I'd even agreed to move in. My son's mouth tightened. Then the spreadsheet, $86,400 over 4 years. The text messages printed and labeled in my daughter's careful system. The receipts. "You prepared a demand for $63,000, Harmon said, 8 weeks before your father set foot in your home. During those 8 weeks, your father gave you $25,000 in cash. You did not disclose the demand you had already prepared. Under Arizona Revised Statute 46456, this constitutes financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." My daughter-in-law spoke for the first time. "He's not a vulnerable adult. He's perfectly healthy." "He's 64, Harmon said. "The statute applies. Cognitive assessment on record confirms full capacity, which protects him in the other direction." My son was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me directly. "Dad, we were struggling. The business isn't doing what we needed it to do. We needed help and we didn't know how to ask. You printed an invoice," I said. 8 weeks before I arrived." He looked down. Said nothing. "You prepared a trap," I said. "You called me while I was still grieving your mother. You told me to come stay with you, and you had the paperwork ready before I answered. I want to know one thing. Was any of it real? When you said you wanted me there? When Beckett ran to the door the first afternoon and hugged me, was any of it real, or was that part of it too?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "It was real. The business we panicked. I believed him, and I didn't know whether that made it better or worse." He signed the form. Ray witnessed it. My daughter made a copy on her phone. Harmon took the original. My son and daughter-in-law left without speaking again. I sat in the library community room after they were gone and listened to the fluorescent lights humming above the table. That night my daughter took me to a Thai restaurant near the hotel and made me eat something. She didn't talk about what had happened. She talked about her job, about a hiking trail she'd been meaning to try outside Portland, about whether Beckett was getting enough outdoor time, normal things. I was grateful for it. At 10:30 that night, my phone started buzzing. My son, then my daughter-in-law, then my son again. I watched the screen light up 7 times and did not answer. The next morning, I called Harmon from the hotel. Something was still nagging at me. "Harmon," I said, "the $25,000 I gave him in June. I wire transferred it from my account. He told me it was for a business equipment loan he was behind on. Do you know if I can find out where it actually went?" He paused. "Do you have access to any of his business records? He used to send me quarterly summaries. He said it made him feel accountable." I checked my email. The last summary was from April, the one before June. "Look at those summaries," Harmon said. "Look for any mention of the equipment loan." I went back through 4 quarterly summaries. Not one mentioned an equipment loan. The business liabilities section listed accounts with 3 different lenders, nothing matching what he'd described. I called my daughter. She is better at this kind of research than I am. She spent 2 hours that afternoon on the Arizona Corporation Commission website and the Maricopa County Records portal. She called me back at 4:15. "Dad," she said, "his business, the LLC, it filed for dissolution in January." I sat very still. "January? Before you sold your house in Columbus? before he called you in February. A pause. The business was already dead when he called you to come. The 25,000 you gave him in June. There was no equipment loan. The business was dissolved 5 months earlier. I thought about the February phone call, warm and easy. Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a while? He hadn't called me because he wanted his father nearby. He'd called me because he needed a source of income, and I was the most reliable one he could think of. I called Harmon, told him what my daughter had found. He was quiet for a moment. Wire fraud, he said. If he represented the purpose of the transfer falsely, that's a federal matter. I'm going to refer this to a colleague who handles white collar. I need to think about that, I said. I understand. Take the weekend. I took the weekend. I drove around Tempe and Scottsdale for 2 days, not going anywhere in particular. I stopped once at a park where I'd taken Beckett to feed the ducks in May, when everything still felt straightforward and hopeful. I sat on a bench for an hour, watching a pair of mallards move slowly across the water. I thought about my son at 7 years old, the same age Beckett is now. I thought about a specific afternoon when he'd broken a neighbor's window playing baseball, and I'd made him go knock on the door and apologize. He'd stood on that porch for 5 minutes working up the nerve, and when the neighbor opened the door, he'd said, "I'm really sorry, sir. I'll pay for it from my allowance." He'd said it clearly, and he looked the man in the eye. I'd been proud of him. Somewhere between that porch and that library conference room, something had changed. I didn't know exactly where or when, and I didn't know if I ever would. On Monday, I called Harmon and told him not to file the wire fraud referral. Not yet. I told him I wanted to watch and to wait. I found an apartment in Scottsdale, a 1-bedroom in a complex near the canal, $1,200 a month. Quiet neighbors, a small patio where I put Audrey's ceramic cardinal on the railing the day I moved in. I'd bought a used couch, a decent bed, a coffee maker that worked properly. My daughter helped me set up the patio furniture on a Saturday afternoon in August, and we ordered pizza and sat outside until the sun went down and the air finally cooled to something bearable. My son called twice in September. I let both go to voicemail. The messages were brief, almost formal. He said he wanted to talk, said he knew he'd made a mistake, said he was sorry. The word sorry was in both messages, once each time placed near the end like a period. I played them twice each. Then I put the phone down and went for a walk. What I want to say to my son, if I ever find the right words, is this: I don't need the money back. I have what I need. But what he took from me wasn't money. It was the version of our relationship I thought we had. The one where I was his father, and he was my son, and the love between us wasn't a transaction being calculated in a spreadsheet from 9 states away. That version, I don't know if I'm getting back. My daughter comes down from Portland every other month. We hike on Saturday mornings, slow trails because my knees aren't what they were. She sends me articles about things she thinks I'd find interesting. She calls every Sunday, same as always. Beckett sent me a drawing in October through the mail. A dinosaur, green crayon, with the label Grandpa's Dino printed in careful capital letters across the top. I taked it to the refrigerator. I still haven't written back to my son. The weather in Scottsdale in November is extraordinary, the kind of warmth that feels earned after summer, gentle and golden in the afternoon. I sit on my patio with coffee and watch the light change over the canal. The ceramic cardinal catches the sun and throws a small spot of red onto the concrete. I talk to Audrey sometimes, not in any mystical way, just out loud in the silence, the way you talk to someone you've been married to for 36 years, the way the habit of their presence doesn't leave you just because they have. I told her what happened, all of it. I said I thought I'd handled it the right way, and then I said I wasn't sure, and then I said I hoped so. She didn't answer. She never does. But the cardinal caught the light, and the canal was still, and the coffee was hot, and that was enough for the morning.